Just clarifying a previous video because someone demanded that I cover a very specific subject. I'm going to cover it last in the sequence from that video. The Boeing 757 and 767 airplanes' flight control system was not fly-by-wire. It had the ability to alter basically an air brake. That's it. And that could be disabled and you'd have manual control over it. They could not implement any kind of uninterruptible autopilot because they didn't have the wiring in 2001 to do that, and the Boeing Honeywell idea of this was an idea. Next, the idea here is somebody would break into this system that's supposed to be secretly implanted that nobody knew about, and then remote control them as an excuse to keep us from having what happened be real, I guess. Next, the MH370 was a Boeing 777. And as the first fly-by-wire airliner, it had to have a certain set of characteristics or no pilot would fly the damn thing. It had to retain a conventional control yoke, and it had to have mechanical backups and supplements to the system so that the pilot could completely override the computer-mediated control system. How did this work? Any pilot could grab any control and override the autopilot and autothrottles by simply disobeying the computer. They did it with frightening regularity that annoyed people, but who gives a crap? It's the pilot. He's ultimately responsible for whether or not the plane stays in the air or crashes into the ground. As such, it did not have the ability to do the other way around of overriding the human. And you could just completely disable it if it did anything screwy, because this was essentially the first airliner to do it, so it was treated like a prototype. They didn't trust it enough with their lives, so it was not able to override the pilot and act as a hijack kit. Global Hawk is an unmanned surveillance aircraft. It's not a subsystem on any of the airplanes. It's not some super secret thing Able Danger invented out of their ass. Yes, it is. Next. A remote hijack system that was never secretly installed can't do anything if it was never actually built. And yes, there's an example of somebody making a fly-by-wire airplane into basically a giant drone, as we call them now, and crashing it. Yes, there's a video like that. There may be more than one for crash testing these things. I understand that. But that did not involve just plugging in a USB drive and tricking the system into flying accidentally and killing people. So now I'm going to get to what the person complained about me not covering thoroughly, because I didn't think it was necessary. The QRS11 is a well-documented gyroscope unit that's mostly read-only. It has an input pin, technically. Its solder pin out assignments, which you can look up, and I'm going to list them verbally and in the description below so you can ignore everything I said, are as follows. Wire 1, 5, and 6 did not connect to anything. They were for future usage later for something a person might come up with. But the fact is they weren't connected to anything. But pin 2 was the self-test input, which would tell it if you fed in 1 volt or so to go into self-test mode. Now we'll wait for the insanely loud, obnoxious vehicle to go by because I'm not competing with a 500 horsepower engine that insists on slowing down. I like delivery vehicles, but good God, that's a little bit loud. Drop the bass fiddle. So anyway, here we go. What were the rest of the wires? Well, pin 3 was plus voltage input. It's not an input, it's voltage DC. It's power. The next wire was ground. Number 5 was output of the data. And like I said, 5 and 6 are not connected to anything. Rate output was to feed out the information so you could synchronize the data. Signal ground, so you could ground the signal pathway from the case ground, which is 10, and the power ground, which is 4. So you can have isolated power system, casing, etc. So you can have all of them meet internally to a pinpoint as a, or whatever you do for it. It depends on what you're doing. This is for noise killing. And it had a negative voltage DC input, so you can have it run a floating voltage. You can have plus or minus voltages on it. Most of the time that would be just grounded along with the power ground and signal ground and everything else, and the case ground, which is 10. But anyway, that was pin 9 for the negative voltage. And the assertion by Able Danger and other idiots, it's a YouTube channel, is that you could somehow tell this thing to lie about your global positioning system or something. It's a gyroscope. It feeds out data about what angle it's detecting things relative to a previous differential version, or it could do it from an absolute. It is not something that can tell the plane to steer itself into a tree or something. I mean, it could, but you'd kind of notice that. So no, MH370 and the airplanes on September 11th were not remote controlled by hacking the QRS11, doing something called Global Hawk, which actually has nothing to do with any of the airplanes, a non-existent Boeing, Honeywell, Uninterruptible Autopilot, or breaking into a fly-by-wire system that wasn't implemented the way you think it was. And none of this would be able to stop the pilots from overriding it. On the other end of the spectrum, we have the MAX 8 Boeing airplane that does override pilots. A real-world thing where I got chastised for saying so. And me saying it shouldn't be able to do that. So I'm going to read back some of the stuff that I didn't stuff in the previous video so I can just fill this one out. A cockpit alert notifying pilots of a sensor malfunction linked to the fatal accidents wasn't working as represented. What does that translate to? The manual and a few other things said, just like the previous one, someone said, well, it's just like the previous one. No, it isn't. The previous one would alert you if you had misidentified or malfunctioning sensors that were trying to steer the thing into the damn ground. So you could disable it by seeing, oh, there's a conflict here. On previous 737NG models, they had that. The disagree alert, as it is called, was meant to show if the two angle of attack vanes provided conflicting data. So you could immediately tell it, you're full of crap, I'm going to fly this in slow and stable mode. That wasn't available. Why? Because you had to pay extra money for it. Boeing made it to where you had to pay money to have the ability to find out that the plane was cuckoo. They, after the wrecks, and after this was pointed out that they didn't even tell people the MCAS system was doing any of this, they really didn't. They finally said, okay, we won't charge for that. Yeah, after losing hundreds and hundreds of people's lives because you didn't let people know they were getting conflicting data because one of the angle of attack indicators was damaged. They're supposed to be redundant systems. If there's a conflict, the human being has to isolate out and figure it out. And you can watch a YouTube video of somebody explaining exactly how they do that. If there's more than one crisis, they have to handle them in order. And there has to be a procedure for it. And the first one is turn off the damn thing's ability to override you when you're trying to fix a problem. Boeing CEO Dennis, whatever his name is, explained the failure to disclose the presence of the MCAS at all, which was only mentioned once in one version of the manual and not at all in the other, on its Boeing 737 MAX 8 and other airliners. The company didn't disclose the existence of the systems to pilots because it's not a separate system to be trained on, which of course is bullshit. It's fundamentally embedded in the handling qualities of the airplane. That sounds like market speak. Hello? They weren't allowed to find out the equipment was wrong. When the computer's wrong, you override it immediately. No exceptions. Automation shouldn't be full auto. It should be at discretion. Informed consent has not been gained. When you train on the airplane, you're being trained in MCAS. No, you're not, because you disabled one of the indicators to tell the pilots that it wasn't really working correctly, and you charged them money if they wanted it, and you had to change that policy because it caused some people to lose their lives. The existence of this only came to light after the Lion Air flight in October of last year crashed, JT610. They didn't even acknowledge it existed because it was a bodge job and a patch originally put on. The CEO said, it's a system that's designed to provide handling qualities for the pilots that meet pilot preferences. But the pilot preference, according to hundreds of complaints through a NASA-maintained database, was that they needed the ability to turn the damn thing off because it was wrong. And what did you guys do? You wanted to charge them extra money to let them find out it's wrong. Boeing 737's MAX 8 manual mentions MCAS only once in the one that actually mentions it, and doesn't mention it in the other. And when it says you can do the disabling of the auto trim, it'll also mention that you have that indicator when you don't too. Next, Boeing says cockpit alert system wasn't working on every 737. The actual answer is they made you pay money for it, or you couldn't have one. But he said that it wasn't working on all the systems. He opened his big ass mouth, shoved his foot and his entire ass in there. Are the disable switches on the panels easily accessible to both pilots? Someone said they are. So image below and the page below. Now you have to actually read it. They had to relabel it because, well, why would they relabel it from one thing to another? Because the labeling was wrong or unclear, or sounded like the labeling for a different thing. So they weren't easily identified. They expressed outrage at not being alerted to the presence of that system aboard the plane they flew. They were very angry that they didn't have the ability to overwrite it or get trained how to do it. And again, the manual never mentioned the goddamn MCAS. And it used controls that were labeled in a way that didn't match what they were supposed to be looking for. I guess we'll have to do revision 5. So someone's saying it's clearly visible and they should have been trained in it. Yes, that's true. But you shouldn't, you know, be mean to the people who designed this. No, I'm mean to the CEO who went ahead and basically did a bunch of newspeak on this. But thanks for your commentary. I do appreciate it. Hey, I was able to look it up and give you the data too. Now all you have to do is show a video of someone going through this fake stall occurrence, at least in the simulator, and demonstrating the exact procedure for shutting the MCAS up and not trusting it. Oh, and does it still have the indicator on it so you can know that it has a faked input? Broken input? No? Then it shouldn't be turned on. Except when needed. Thanks for watching. Have a good day. Good luck with that.